Ever wonder what the very first video games were really like? I mean, before cartridges, before software, before everything we think of as a video game today? Well, that's what we're digging into, the first generation of consoles, a time of beautifully simple tech that somehow, against all odds, kicked off a revolution.
For so many of us, this is where the story begins, right? Pong. That mesmerizing little back and forth was way more than just a game. It was the spark. It was the big bang for the entire home console industry. But behind this incredibly simple picture is a really fascinating engineering puzzle.
And that's the big question, isn't it? Today, everything has a brain, a CPU, a microprocessor, your phone, your watch, your toaster probably. But these first consoles, they didn't have one. So how on earth did they create a game you could actually play with no software to run? How did they pull it off?
To get that answer, we gotta rewind. We're going back to a time before the PC, a time when the rules for making a game were just completely different. Okay, so let's set the stage. The whole first generation of consoles ran from 1972 all the way to about 1983. But 1972, man, what a year. In June, you have Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney founding this little company called Atari. Then, just a few months later, Magnavox drops the Odyssey, the world's very first home video game console. And then, boom! 1975, Atari's home Pong hits the shelves, and the market just goes absolutely wild. And this whole era was really driven by a handful of brilliant minds. You had Ralph Baer, who people call the father of video games. He created this prototype called the Brown Box, which would later become the Magnavox Odyssey. And it was that Odyssey, with its super simple ping-pong game, that inspired Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney to make their own version, a little arcade hit called Pong. The rest, as they say, is history. But to really get what made these machines tick, you have to understand their biggest limitation. A limitation that weirdly was also the source of all their creativity. They were basically brainless. This is it. This is the single most important thing to wrap your head around. There was no CPU, no central processing unit, no single all-purpose chip that could be told what to do. The very idea of software just didn't apply to these things. So think about it. A microprocessor is like a master chef. You can give it any recipe, any piece of software, and it'll follow the instructions to cook up a result. This means one chef, one piece of hardware, can make thousands of different dishes or play thousands of different games. These first consoles, they didn't have the chef. And this comparison just lays it all out perfectly. A first-gen Pong machine was a one-trick pony. The game was the hardware, literally built into its circuits. You couldn't change it. Now, look at a second-gen console, like the Atari 2600. It had a CPU, you could pop in a new cartridge, and that CPU would read the software on it and play a totally different game. It was a quantum leap. Which brings us back to the big question. If there's no software, how do you make a game? Well, the answer is kind of beautiful in its simplicity. You don't program the rules. You build them, directly, out of circuits. This is the mantra of the entire era. The hardware is the software. There's no separation. The program isn't code stored in memory. It's the physical layout of the circuit board itself. Engineers weren't programmers. They were more like sculptors, shaping raw logic into a playable experience. The game was literally etched into silicon. And it all starts with the smallest possible piece of information, a single bit. Seriously, just think of a light switch. It's either on or it's off, 1 or 0. That's it. That simple two-state idea is the bedrock of every single digital device we've ever made. So what do you do with those ones and zeros? You feed them into logic gates. These are like microscopic decision makers. For instance, an AND gate will only turn on if input A and input B are both on. By hooking up thousands of these simple little gates, you can create circuits that perform incredibly complex actions all without a single line of code. And here's how it all came together. You take those individual logic gates and you wire them up to create what's called a state machine. You can think of it as a special purpose computer that doesn't need code. There was a physical circuit for the ball, a physical circuit for the paddle, a circuit for the score. The rules, like if the ball hits the wall, make it bounce, weren't lines of code. They were actual physical wires connecting one circuit to another. It's just incredible. Now, this hardwired design was a work of genius, for sure. But it had one giant, unavoidable flaw. It trapped the console, and you, the player, in one single solitary experience. And this right here is the crucial point. This design was basically a dead end. If you got tired of Pong and wanted to play, say, a driving game, you had to go out and buy a whole new box. So when Pong blew up, the market was just flooded with dozens of copycat machines. Why? Because creating a genuinely new game meant designing and building a completely new console from the ground up every single time. It just wasn't sustainable.
You can see this evolution, or maybe refinement even, within the generation. The first Odyssey used all these individual circuits, and its game cards weren't software. They were just physical plugs that literally rewired the console on the fly. Just 3 years later, Atari had figured out how to cram all of Pong's logic onto one single custom-made chip. But even that amazing Pong on a chip was still just one game, frozen in silicon forever.
So yeah, the one-game trap couldn't last. The industry desperately needed a way to break the game free from the machine. And lucky for everyone, the exact technology to do it was right around the corner. The beginning of the end for the first generation and the beginning of the future all came down to one single year, 1976. This was it. This was the year everything was about to change. And the console that made the leap wasn't from Atari, it wasn't from Magnavox, it was a machine called the Fairchild Channel F. It holds the honor of being the very first home console to have a microprocessor inside. And with that brain came the magic of programmable cartridges. The second generation was officially born. What the microprocessor brought to the table was the stored program concept. This is the revolutionary idea that the instructions for the game, the software, could live separately from the hardware that runs it. It meant one machine could suddenly run a potentially infinite number of games. The hardware was no longer the game. It had become a platform for games. So you think about it. The first consoles hardwired a single game directly into a machine. But in doing so, they unlocked a much bigger, more profound question. What happens when the machine can learn to play any game you can possibly imagine? That single leap didn't just change technology. It turned a box of wires into a canvas for infinite worlds. It's how video games went from being a fixed object to becoming a limitless art form.